It's happening, you guys. Tonight is the night. My hair is out. I've got my clay that I happened to find at Five Below. I've got my book. I'm gonna brew myself a cup of tea, listen to some lo-fi, and I'm about to get into it. I'm going to try my hand at one of the projects in the Klutz Make Anything with Clay book. I'm gonna go, I think, for this bear that's doing ballet, because I'm sure most of my initial projects are probably gonna end up in my daughter's room. I'll probably have to get her a few corner shelves and she will proudly display my handiwork until it's good enough to actually, you know, give to anybody else. Yeah, let's get started. Brew a cup of tea with me. Listen to some relaxing music with me. Let's get into it. So like I mentioned in my intro, I got this polymer clay at Five Below, which if you don't know, it's a pretty cool store. I think it's marketed mostly to teenagers, but most of the stuff in there is about, $5 or below, hence the name. So I figured that this clay was probably not going to be super high quality, but it was going to suit my purposes for being a complete beginner at making these projects that were first designed in the early 2000s. So right now I'm picking out all of my colors for this bear that I'm going to make. I did quickly realize, because of the size of these clay bars, they're all pretty small, that I was probably going to need multiple different shades of brown just to make one bear. So I'm just picking out all the ones that I think might be the best fit. And unwrapping my first block, I think this is when my stress level started shooting up a little bit. I didn't remember the clay being so hard to knead initially, but I eventually kind of, rolled it into submission. Here's the bear. So that's the actual size that the body is going to be. And then on the other side here, we have the beautiful ballerina bear that I'm planning to make for my daughter. Not a whole lot of actual directions going on, more of a diagram situation. And I initially started with a time-lapse deal going on, but I quickly realized that I'd probably only have, 5 minutes of footage to make an entire bear, and that's not really what I was going for. So I eventually slowed it back down. But here I am crafting the body, and what you don't see is the panic of me realizing that I don't have enough clay to actually make this bear's body. So I'm rolling out a piece in a different color, and thankfully something about the creative process is it does really force you to think outside the box and consider what some alternatives might be. So in this situation, I decided to roll out a larger piece in this maroon color, and then I took a break to make the muzzle in the lighter brown. But then I remembered an old technique from when I was a kid of just using, an alternate color and then just rolling out whatever scrap you have in the color you want to use, rolling it out super thin, and then just placing it directly over that other ball. So I was pretty proud of myself for remembering that and being able to do it again, because if I do say so myself, I feel like it turned out pretty seamless. And while I'm putting all these pieces together, I figured this would be a good time to just go a little bit into story mode and dig a little bit deeper into why I feel like my creativity took a big hibernation period. Maybe pun intended because of the bears. But I said in my first video that I felt like it took a hibernation period starting back when I went into grad school. I think that's because I went to get a master's in counseling, and my undergrad had nothing to do with that. I was an English major, and I had decided to get a master's in counseling just because of the work experience that I had after college, working primarily with high-risk youth. So I wanted to be able to work with them on a deeper level, actually understand, things that they were going through, and just have just a much bigger set of knowledge and understanding and tools to be able to come alongside them and help them to succeed. And starting that process, it was just an entirely new world, an entire new language, just a lot of things that I had never learned about before, having never taken any sort of psychology class before. So this was being thrown into the deep end. And so it just started to feel like all of the knowledge, learning diagnosis and counseling ethics and different theories and approaches, it was so all-consuming, all-encompassing, that it just felt like I didn't really have much time for anything else. I did also have a half-time job on campus grading literally thousands of middle schoolers' essays, 20 hours a week, so I could get tuition reduction. So that was also pretty all-consuming. Thankfully, eventually, we trained artificial intelligence to do our job by reading all of our responses and creating a rubric for them. So in that sense, I'm glad the robots took the job, because that was the most tedious thing I've ever done. I'll pause that story to tell you quickly about the legs situation. Since I had run out of the dark brown clay, I needed a different color for the legs, and initially I was going to do like pink tights, but then I realized, if I do lighter brown, then it'll just look like this ballerina bear is wearing nude tights. So that's the progress right there. Going back to the creativity slump, I graduated with my master's back in December of 2017, and then I started working full-time as a therapist in January of 2018. I worked in community mental health, and that is a really big proving ground as well. You have higher caseloads. I specifically was on a team that was dedicated to serving high-risk youth. It was an intensive outpatient program, and I frequently referred to it as like the Navy SEALs. It felt like a therapist. I worked with some very smart, very caring people who really just wanted to be a light for all of these youth that were in our program, and I love them very much. But it also just felt like being thrown into the deep end, and I can only speak for myself, but I have a feeling that a lot of first-time therapists feel this way, where you go into the field and you just really feel like you have no idea what you're doing. I think a lot of programs don't actually do much to teach you really how to treat people. They teach you a lot about diagnosis, they teach you theories, but you really just have very few practicum hours, and you learn most of your skills and techniques really, during your internship and then in your first few years of being a therapist, honestly. I don't know if, the profession really wants the general public to know much about that, but most therapists starting out really don't have sufficient training. I'm gonna just say that right now. But because of that constant fear that you are somehow doing the wrong thing, you're screwing something up, you're not doing enough to maintain this person's medical chart that you are suddenly in charge of, it also just felt like, still, even being out of school, that I didn't have much time for the kind of creativity, at least, that I was used to. I will say, being in the field that I'm in does take a lot of creativity. You are constantly working with all sorts of different people, and depression is not a monolith. People are depressed for a variety of reasons. That has a variety of starting points, and depending on the person's age, their background, the interest that they have, working with them and helping them to kind of come out of that hole, it takes a lot of creativity to come up with some solutions together and find a process that might work in that situation for that person. So I was definitely still using creativity, just in a very different way, not writing poetry or working on scripts or anything like that, just more so day-to-day work-based creativity. So we got her shoes all good to go now during that time, and now pretty much the last big piece is working on this tutu. So I rolled out this piece initially and was trying to fold it all together in this kind of accordion to put on the bear. This one, it didn't work so well for me the first time, but I wanted to include it because that's part of the process. I finished this little ruffle. I was trying to put it on the bear, and it was just not working out for me. So I ended up taking it off and starting over again. And that's to be expected. This is the first time I've made something, and I don't even know the last time I made whatever, the clay wizard from my other book. I was probably maybe like 14 when I stopped. So it's to be expected. I'm gonna have to be okay with being a complete beginner. And man, I really hope I can get to a point where making this stuff is a little bit more relaxing, because I had to remind myself pretty frequently to actually, breathe while I was doing this, because it was a little stressful being back at the start doing something and just not being good at it. But I have to concede and remind myself, I am in my 30s now. There's no way that I can, just be seen as a wunderkind or like a prodigy for anything anymore. I'm too old to be a prodigy, I think. So hopefully that can give a little bit of, encouragement, or just help me feel better, help someone else feel better. It's like no one expects you to be a prodigy at this point. If you want to do something, just do it. And it doesn't have to be, A+ at the beginning. Something I have to tell my students now, a whole bunch. But yeah, now it's just the final piece, working on this tiny little nose, and we'll be just about done here. And here she is, on display for the first time, Ballerina Bear. You know what? She turned out pretty good. For my first go-round, especially in this lighting, really does wonders for her. I'm pretty proud of this. So she just goes into the oven now for about half an hour. It has to be at 275. I read that if it's any higher, then some pretty terrible gases, I guess, can get released during the baking process. 30 minutes later, she's baked, and she's ready to not stand up fully because I didn't flatten her feet, but she's ready to be propped in my daughter's room on the shelf that I still need to buy and put in her room. Baby steps. As I twirl her around, you can see an imperfection in the back. I had to actually add a little bit more pink because my accordion tutu didn't wrap around the whole way, but nothing too bad. But here she is. This is the first thing I've made in a lot of years, and hopefully the first of just many more to come. I'm looking forward to continuing to grow, and I appreciate you coming along for the ride. I'm not even fully sure if I finished my story about creativity, so I'll probably just, keep that going in the next one. Stay tuned.